Okay, the next talk will be presented by David Harwath. It's joint work with Adria, Recasens, Didac Suris, Galen, Chuang, Antonio Torralba, and James Klaas. And it will be about discovering visual objects and spoken words. Please.
Hello. So good afternoon, and thank you for coming to my talk today. I am David Harwath, and today I'm going to be talking about our work on jointly discovering visual objects and spoken words from raw sensory input. So as machine learning researchers, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to make computers learn in ways that are similar to how humans learn. We're interested in designing algorithms that can learn to solve problems like understanding the visual world or recognizing spoken language. But our state-of-the-art techniques require a lot of very rigid annotation, right? If you want to make a object classification system, you need to get somebody to come in and manually transcribe what objects are in the scene. Similarly, for speech recognition, you need many thousands of utterances of waveforms where somebody has actually come in and written down time-aligned words as they appear in the audio. And human beings seem to learn dramatically different from that. So to try and convince you of that, check out this video.
In the summer, I like to lie in the sun and watch the birds. And I like to watch the frogs in the pond. Then I curl up in my hollow tree and dream about spring. The end.
So even though humans seem to learn differently from computers, they still get very angry when you don't give them enough training data. Now, there's been a lot of work recently jointly modeling visual images as well as text. And now the thing about that is that children don't really get linguistic information in the same form that the computer does. Because when the computer sees text, like two white lambs in a meadow or a mountain chained with forests and trees, it's conveniently already got all of the words pre-segmented from the words that are adjacent to it. And not only that, every time you see the word lambs in your data set, it appears exactly the same way. There's really no ambiguity as to which word it is. But the child in the video that we just saw didn't get access to, the ASCII representation beamed straight into their head. They actually had to deal with a waveform that was coming into their ears. And this waveform, all the words are somewhere inside there, but just in the same way that the objects in these images are unsegmented, the words in this waveform don't come segmented from one another for the child. And not only that, there's an enormous amount of variability that's non-lexical in nature. In those waveforms. So you've got different accents, you've got different noise conditions, you've got different kinds of microphones, and all of these things are adding background noise and distortion to the waveform. So every time you see a word in speech, it's actually completely different in the feature space. So the goal of the work that I'm presenting to you today is basically to attempt to jointly solve two different but coupled problems. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to be able to do visual object segmentation and discovery, as well as word discovery simultaneously in the speech. And we'd like to come up with the linkages between the two modalities. So if this red box here is what covers the underlying word lambs, we'd like to derive a segmentation mask around the lambs and to figure out that this piece of audio matches this region in the image, and similarly with trees and the trees in the right-hand side. So to collect an appropriate data set for doing this kind of learning, we turned to crowdsourcing on Amazon Mechanical Turk, where we collected nearly 500,000 spoken captions for the Places 205 data set, as well as 8020K for evaluation. And we got captions from about 2,500 different people with a really wide variety of ages and accents and gender and everything. And we just asked people to describe the images like they were describing them to a blind person or somebody who couldn't see what was going on. So the idea is that we're not really prompting them to use any specific kind of language or grammar. We just want them to sort of talk about the salient objects, textures, colors, things like that are inside the visual images. So here's an example of somebody describing this image on the right.
This is a photo of a girl standing in front of a lighthouse. The little girl is wearing a blue print dress. She has blonde hair and blue eyes. The lighthouse in the background is white with a red roof.
So given an image and the spoken caption that's describing the content of the image, we to model the relationship between these two semantically, we came up with this class of networks we're calling deep audiovisual embedding networks, or DAVE-nets. And the way that we're going to model these is we're going to pass them through a pair of fully convolutional networks, which are basically going to produce a feature map, a spatial feature map for the image and a temporal feature map for the waveform. And then what we're going to do is we're going to basically score every single region within the image against every single temporal position in the audio to produce this three-dimensional density tensor that we're calling a match map. And so if red denotes higher similarity score over here, then you can kind of see that this is giving you an alignment between a particular XY spatial position in the image and a particular temporal index in the waveform. And what I want to emphasize here is that all the weights in our networks are randomly initialized. So we're not using any sort of pre-trained weights for the image network on ImageNet or anything like that, because half of the entire problem here is that we actually want to teach the visual network to see with the aid of the audio, giving it this contextual grounding, and vice versa to learn a representation of speech. So given that we've got a network that's capable of computing a match map given any arbitrary image and audio waveform pair, what we'd like to be able to do then is use that match map to derive an overall scalar valued similarity score telling us how well does this particular caption describe this image. And so what we're going to do, there's a few different ways that we came up with this, and the details are on the paper, but our favorite method is to basically walk along the time axis of the audio and grab the best region of the image map that seems to match it the best. And then what we're going to do is we're going to average across the time dimension to produce an aggregate score that reflects how well a caption describes what's going on in an image. So now that we've got a way to compute the similarity score between an image and the caption that describes it, or any other caption for that matter, we can actually then turn to the triplet loss training objective function to train the weights of this network. So what we'd like to do is, given a ground truth pair that we know goes together, so we don't know what the objects are, we don't have any labels, we don't know what the words are in the audio, the only knowledge that we have is that we know that this audio is what somebody said when they saw this image. So we'd like to make the similarity between this pair high, but because these scores are unbounded, we're going to turn to the triplet loss and say, well, we care about relative differences in scores. So we want to make the similarity score between these two blue things relatively higher than the score between the image of the guys in the car and this caption that is just describing some other image that's sampled elsewhere in our data set. And we're going to do this symmetrically, so in addition to enforcing the triplet loss in this direction, we'll also just randomly sample other images that are not described by the blue caption and try and make those scores smaller than the anchor pair. So at the start of training, our networks don't know very much, and so you wouldn't expect the match maps to really give you any sort of valuable insight into what's going on. In fact, they start out quite diffuse because every piece of the audio, kind of just matches every region of the image approximately equally. But as training goes on, what you're going to see is actually we converge to an alignment that seems to be relatively stable. So after you've trained for long enough, you see these bubbles in the density start to appear, which seem to say that, this region on the left, that's capturing the girl in the blue dress, seems to really resonate with that first section of the spectrogram down there, whatever that may be. So let's take a closer look at what these match maps are actually telling us. So I'm going to show you a series of videos where we've taken the match map and we've actually then used it to modulate the alpha channel over the image, and we're going to play it through time so that it's synchronized with the audio. So basically you're going to see the image light up at a point in time wherever the network thinks it's being described.
This is a photo of a girl standing in front of a lighthouse. The little girl is wearing a blue print dress. She has blonde hair and blue eyes. The lighthouse in the background is white with a red roof.
Here in this picture, there's some skiers going up a mountain.
Large brick castle is in the distance. It is surrounded by bushes.
Here we see a stretch of grass and a small road leading up to a very old ancient ruin.
A view of a very tall mountain or volcano with snow on the top, with a lush green field with red flowers in it.
Many people waiting on the platform for a yellow train on rusty tracks. a white and blue jet airliner near trees at the base of a low mountain.
So I've shown you some subjective results that suggest that our models are learning to jointly segment and recognize visual objects as well as spoken words across both modalities, as well as establish the semantic grounding between the two. So in our paper, we include a suite of many different numerical analyses to give in a more objective view of what's going on that seems to confirm this, this conclusion. But today I'm just going to show you two of those experiments. So what I've done here is I've extracted volumetric connected components from a thresholded match map corresponding to this caption in this image, and then I've color-coded each component so that you can visually see which grounding is reflected here. So we've got the yellow box at the top covering white and blue jet airliner, matching the white and blue jet airliner down there. Similarly, the red is seeming to highlight the trees, as well as the audio where somebody said trees, and also with the green mountains. And so what we can do now that we have these groundings is we can actually just snip out all of these image regions and audio regions, and we can do this over a large data set like AD20K, where we have semantic segmentation masks giving us a ground truth for the image, as well as time-aligned audio transcriptions of the speech that we collected. And so then we can do clustering analysis on all the connected components that we collect from the data set and see what kind of purity we're getting and what kind of visual labels are being clustered together with which audio words. So here's just a plot of the purity scores of the top 50 clusters that we get doing this. And on the bottom, what I'm showing is a pair of the capital letters denote the spoken word, the underlying transcript of a spoken word, and the lowercase is the AD20K object label. And so you see that there's a lot of there's a very high purity being reflected in a lot of these clusters, both across the audio label as well as the visual label. But not only that, there's very, very close semantic coupling and matching between the labels that are assigned to the same cluster. So for example, we've got the very first cluster on the left capturing visual instances of buildings as well as spoken instances of buildings with more than 90% purity. Blue matching sky, trees, alleyway building, pool, swimming pool, flowers matching plant. And you can just kind of walk down and see, oh yeah, there's a lot of really, really cool correspondences that are being learned here. So another really cool experiment that we did where we tried to actually investigate how this might be happening is we ran the whole data set through the network so that what we could do then is we could grab one particular neuron in the embedding layer and then extract the images as well as their segmentation masks that maximally activate that one neuron. And we can do that on the visual side as well as the audio side. And when you do that, you basically get an exemplar-based audiovisual dictionary that's indexed by the neurons in the embedding layer. And so here's a few examples from an audiovisual dictionary that you can build doing this. And the details on how we do this in the paper are in the paper, how we actually sort of decide whether or not a neuron has learned to be a good multimodal detector. But the details of that are in paper like I mentioned, but in general, we're learning on the order of hundreds of different kinds of detectors that are jointly learning to detect visual objects as well as the spoken words that describe them. So the last thing that I want to just mention is how there's really been a surge of interest in jointly modeling visual inputs with other modalities, including many works at ECCV this year, just like the one that Andrew just presented. And what makes our work unique is the fact that we're attempting to model the visual semantics of spoken language. But I think that there's an enormous amount of cross-pollination of ideas that are possible within this realm of multi-sensor modeling, and we're incredibly excited to see so much great work upcoming on the horizon. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and please download our data and code at this URL here and play with it for yourself, and come visit us at poster 2B86 this afternoon. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, up here, left, right, actually, you're right. Hi. Yeah, so basically I'm interested in, so I can see that you've learned some really good image and audio features. Do you think that the visual features you've learned are also, because it seems to be able to be done in a non-supervised way, right? So like, do you think the visual features you've learned could be applied to vision tasks and be a good pre-training as well? Do you think there's applications there?
So that's one thing that we didn't include any results on in this paper, but I do think that it's definitely worth trying. I think there's a really good possibility that this kind of pre-training would be good for other tasks. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have to move on to the next speaker. So.